Mine's a bit of a funny story. I've been in media most of my life, mostly in audio. I had a period, 6 or 7 years straight after university, that I worked in sports. So I worked for Tennis Australia, Rugby World Cup, on the commercial part of it. And most of my clients at that time were media related, television networks, radio networks, etc. And so eventually one of those clients said, why do we spend all our time negotiating, come work for us? So that was just after the Sydney Olympics, so 2001. So best part of 23 years I've spent working in media companies, privately owned by some prominent global names. But I've been here in Dubai, this will be year 14, just literally coming up in a couple of months. It'll be 14 years that I've been here in Dubai working for the ARN Group. I was approached off LinkedIn from a recruiter, and I wasn't 100% sure where Dubai was. I mean, I knew it was the Middle East, but I had honestly very little idea about it, and I had no idea about the company or what was going on in the region. This is late 2011, so I think probably just as Dubai started to build again, coming out of the back of the financial crisis. Anyway, my wife convinced me to respond to the email. I wasn't even going to respond, and so I did, and then had a series of chats over video, and then 2 weeks later was on a plane. They flew me out to have a look around and get familiar with the region, and at the end of that trip I signed and went home and told 4 children under 10 that we were moving to some country they'd never heard of. So yeah, it wasn't a plan, wasn't a strategy. I think we were joking before. I think like a lot of people, I thought, you know, what's the worst that can happen? I'll come for a couple of years, make some dollars and see what happens. And as I said, that was nearly 14 years ago, and this is definitely home. Our first position was Group Director of Sales at ARN. At that time, we were 100% just an audio network. That was even probably before we had a great deal of penetration on digital. We were fundamentally a pure radio network at that time, with the 9 brands that we still operate today. And then progressively over that period of time, I've taken on a variety of more responsibilities, obviously in our digital innovation area, but then also in 2018 we launched an out-of-home company called MPN, which is, you know, now pretty close to equal the size of ARN. And, you know, we have some pretty ambitious plans over the next 12 to 18 months to double that again in terms of, you know, our desire ultimately as ARN as a group, our desire is to make us the first port of call for advertisers in this country. Because we're producing great content and we're blessed as a business that we have, you know, if not certainly in the top handful of talent in their particular nationality group. If you look across our group, whether that's English, whether that's Arabic, whether that's Malayalam, whether that's Hindi, these guys are the biggest names in town. And in that process, that helps us grow advertising opportunities right across the spectrum. Yeah, look, I think you're right, it's a challenge. And I think part of it is giving them the opportunity to do more and create opportunities for them to do more than beyond their shows, and to be able to extend their footprint in social and digital, sometimes in television and whatever else. So we work closely with our top talent and making sure that they can explore those opportunities beyond their current job. So whether that's, you know, Chris Fade, whether that's the guys on Business Breakfast, whether that's Nyla on Hit, you know, they have a lot of work that's beyond our traditional footprint. So I think in allowing them to do that, it extends their reach, it extends their potential earning capacities, and it keeps them vibrant, you know, particularly for our breakfast show guys. It's a tough job. You're up at 4 every day, 5 days a week, 48 weeks of the year, producing content that you're trying to be warm, engaging, funny, entertaining for lots of people who might be struggling to get out of bed to go to their job they're not all that happy with. It's not an easy job, and it takes its toll. So you're right, we've been fortunate in being able to keep consistent with the talent that we have in our network, but it requires focus. and you can't rest on your laurels, because that talent is in demand, not just within competing media companies here, but competing media companies regionally, and then obviously from their own countries as well. Yeah, probably 8 or 9 years ago, the real estate sector represented maybe 5% of our total business. Today it's more like 20, 25%, and I think that's representative of the reality of the growth of that as an industry. Also the diversity of that, there's a lot more developers now than there were 7 or 8 years ago. And there's certainly an incredible amount of brokerages, and probably, to be honest, we have a great relationship with developers. We work with all the big groups right across the spectrum of what they do. But the biggest growth has been brokerage. And I think what we've seen is brokers wanting to find ways to be able to tell a story about why they're different. And why they're different may not necessarily be about, we sold the most expensive or we sold more. It might be about them telling the story about the relationship they have. I think a lot of brokerages that we work with now want people to have I don't know if relationship's the right word, but perhaps a relationship with the audience, that if you're in the market to buy or sell or rent for that matter, that they're someone you should talk to, and a little bit more storytelling, a little bit less hard sell, and that seems to have worked. And it's grown a category for us that wasn't there 7 or 8 years ago at all. I mean, zero. And today, if you listen to any of our stations, you'll hear a lot of brokerages, and a lot of the time, not just the traditional 30-second spot, but they're also funding brand-funded shows on our stations where they're talking to listeners, and they're talking to our talent about the challenges and questions that are asked and what people should be doing, and providing data on the industry for people to be able to make informed decisions. So, yeah, we think it's an exciting time, but and one where there's a lot of stories to be told. There's obviously an influx of new developers, there's an influx of new projects, and as you rightly have said previously, I don't think people really know. I think people don't really understand who the developer are, the history of that developer, where the development actually is. I think people can get washed in the excitement of buy for this, sell for this, thinking. And I think we provide a platform between our on-air content, between our podcast business, between our social media, and then obviously into our out-of-home business, where people can create a story where ultimately end users can feel comfortable that this is someone who's around, sensible, balanced, and can support me in their investment journey. Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's a great question. And I think, let's be super honest, I think when people talked about building a brand, they actually meant the same thing, which was, if you're a founder of a business, you're a chairman or you're a CEO, I want my brand to be the biggest, which in your head translates to, I have more leads than anyone else and therefore generating more. So I think, if you're Coca-Cola or Emirates or McDonald's, okay, that has a different premise. You're global, you're in multiple companies, you have a brand story to tell to win market share. I think here as a developer or even a broker, either of those two categories, I think ultimately they're looking for leads, and rightly so. That is the cornerstone of their business. That's where the income's generated. And I think radio or the audio part of our business does that better than anyone. There's no question mark. If that wasn't true, you just need to look at events, because for me, events are the perfect mirror example of this process. If there's a single event that happens in this country, sport, concert, cultural, whatever, regardless of the language, the centerpiece partner is ARN. And our job is really simple, is to get people to buy tickets to that event. That's it. And we do it better than anyone. So for me, the translation of that is exactly the same for real estate. So whether you're a developer looking for leads because you have your own internal sales process, or you're a brokerage looking for leads to be able to sell other people's development, I think the fundamental principle is the same. I think at its heart, over its long history, audio has been seen as a call to action mechanism, and I think that's what we do better than anyone. And I think if you speak to real estate companies, I mean, I can give you examples, multiple examples over the last couple of years where we've built campaigns for developers. We've launched the campaign, and a week in, they've said, whoa, pull. It's gone too well. We don't have any more product, thank you. But you know, what was a 3-week campaign was an 8 or 9 day campaign. Do we take some credit for it? Sure. Do I think that also reflects what's going on in the broader city? Yeah, I definitely do. So I think, I think our place sits right at that heartland of call to action. Yeah, I mean, I think ultimately most developers have a sense based on the location of the project, the cost, the square meterage cost of that project and the location as to where they think the demography of buyers may come from. Obviously, they have their history where other projects have gone well, and then based on that, they give us the sense of, and some developers, to be honest, want to crack new territories where there's perhaps a perception that they were a product for this nationality group or these nationality groups, and they want to step up. You know, a great example for me is obviously Bengadi is a great example of, they were producing relatively low cost, affordable housing in lots of middle suburbs. And, you know, over the space of the last 3 or 4 years, they're now, you know, selling super high-end, luxurious product. So I don't think developers are set. I think most developers have a range of product, and then based on that product, they brief us, and then we make recommendations, you know, whether that's at the super luxurious high end, you know, a customer who might be listening to Dubai Eye, for example, our premium talk station, and then all the way through those different nationalities. Each developer has their own skew. I think sometimes people make a mistake in this country that the belief system is if you do one English station, one Arabic station, and one Indian station, you're covered. Now, the reality is that is a big chunk of the population. There is no doubt about it. But I think when an advertiser gets it super right is where they talk to a customer in their language, on their station, in times their environment, then often customers super win. Because nothing resonates more with an end user than a business talking to them in their own language. And particularly if that business, you know, let's take Malayalam, for example. If it's a non-Indian business, but it's speaking to them in Malayalam about an opportunity for them, you'll get super results. There'll be great respect for that process. So I think multiple language for developers is a must, and done well with respect, and then obviously respecting that process, they'll do super well. Yeah, so we have a really good, and what you say is absolutely true. Our greatest success is perhaps our greatest weakness as well. And I always say to people, if you look at, you know, you use the example of Hit, our Malayalam station, as an example, exactly, you know, we might be talking at any given time, there might be listening people at the lowest income bracket in the country to someone who owns, you know, 2 floors of the Burj Khalifa. And that represents the totality of the Malayalam audience. Does that make it easier or harder? No, but you've got width. And when you've got width, I think the art to advertising, any form of advertising, the art is what I would call inclusive advertising. So to be inclusive also means that you have to be exclusive. And what I mean by that is if you talk to a customer, ultimately customers, and when I say customers, customers of developers or customers of brokerage houses, they either have 2 things. One, they have a problem. They want a house, they need a house, they want to make an investment, whatever it might be. Or they have or they see an opportunity. Perhaps I've got some money, I want my money to do something, I want an investment. So talk to them like that, you know? Talk to them like that, because if you do, the person who does have a pile of money sitting in their account, not sure what to do with, is deciding to make that first foray, will hear that ad. If I don't have that pile of money in my account, I won't hear that ad because it's not relative to me. And that's the beauty and power of audio, is we're all driving in the car, we're all locked in our own little world, and the ads that resonate will be the ones that talk to customers about 2 things, an opportunity or a problem. And if you talk to them in that language, in their language, I promise you that resonates. And it also, with being respectful, it excludes those that are not. Because I think the art for me of any form of advertising is being direct and inclusive so people understand what it is. If you make your messaging too wide, too all-encompassing, too thick, then you rule a lot of people in who really aren't your end target audience, or may not have the capital, may not have the opportunity, may not have the desire even because they didn't really understand it. But when you're super direct, and whether that's about price, whether that's about footprint, whether that's about location, whatever the information is, then you rule people in. And out of the 100,000 people driving in their car at that particular time of day on that particular station, maybe there's 20, maybe there's 40 who hear that ad and go, that's me. I need to contact that brokerage. I need to contact that developer. The other 100, they get on with their day and they continue on, waiting for the next ad, which may be relative to them. So the art of advertising, in my opinion, is direct, is inclusive, and in terms of being inclusive, is therefore exclusive. Yeah, look, I'm obviously going to be biased because it's my job to be biased. But look, I think the reality is I'm not a believer that any platform in isolation is the answer. I think things working in combination is the best possible outcome, because I think if any of us sit here, any platform, audio, digital, out of home, TV, anyone can sit here and extol the virtues of what their platforms do, and they'd be right. They'd be absolutely right. But this, for me, it's the sum part. And the sum part is those multiple extensions. I always say to people, the perfect outcome for me in terms of our business is someone driving on Shakeside Road, drives past one of our billboards, and at the moment, take for example, there's a Miras project at D3 on one of those projects, and while they're driving in the car, the station is giving them an ad that's telling them a story about that project at D3. That's the perfect outcome. Then what does that person do? That person then goes online and checks it out. So the question is, which ones of those drove it? I don't think any of them drove it. I think there's some part of that drove it. So if you look at our business today is about building campaigns that create those opportunities. Even if you look at our talent, for example, I would argue there hasn't been a launch in the last year that one of ARN's talent hasn't hosted that launch in combination with the campaign on ARN for that launch. From whether that's Chris Fade, whether that's Business Breakfast, whether that's Nyla, whether that's Mithin, whether that's Khaled on Arabian. One of our presenters, Pretty Malik, one of our presenters, from the biggest of the big all the way through to the newest developers, is hosted by ARN in combination with a launch campaign on ARN. So what some people might have seen is they saw the social of our particular talent, or our station social, or the developer's social. So did that social drive intrigue? Or was it the ad? Or was it the fact that that person's an ARN staff member that drove them to follow in the first place that drove that outcome? So, I'm not going to sit here and talk, is one medium better than the other? I think anyone who puts all their budget in one place, and we've seen that on a global scale. There was a period pre-COVID and over COVID where literally everyone dumped everything they had and put it into digital. And I think the reality is that that's wrong, as would be the case of doing any. And I think you've even seen at the big brand end, even your global behemoths, your J&J, your Procter & Gamble, your Unilever, your Coca-Cola, reinvesting back in traditional broad spectrum media because it's about audience. Ultimately, every media business on the planet is about audience. There was a period of time where you go to any global media conference and everyone was content is king, content is king, content is king. I don't believe it is. I believe platform is king. Content might be queen, maybe princess, but if you don't have the platform, you can produce the greatest content that no one ever sees. You can produce the greatest content that no one ever hears. So can you have the greatest platform and get away with okay content? Yeah, you can. Not forever, but you can. So for me, the ultimate cross bridge of any media business is being able to produce great content that matters to your audience, but having the platform that has reach. And today, we have that reach. You know, today 4.2 million people every week tune into our 9 stations. There is nobody in this country who can be within cooee of what it is that we do on a weekly basis in terms of reaching that. That's 50%, depending on what stat you believe, give or take 50% of the country is engaging with us. And that before we get into the social media platforms, before we get into the digital, that's pure listening to one of our 9 brands. So for any advertiser, this is your gateway to Dubai. This is your gateway to you know, again, for real estate customers, this is your gateway to tell a story. Number 1, reach. Number 2, reach by nationality. And number 3, reach by nationality, and no one knows our audience better than us. So if you had the most definitive, I only want 35-year-old Indian males to buy my project, I'll find more of them than anyone else on our brands. If I want 42-year-old Australian females, I'll find them on our stations, and we'll build a campaign for those people. So at the top end, it's about reach. No one has the reach we have. Number 2, it's about being able to break that by nationality. And then finally, it's able to break that by individual. If you look at any other media type here, they don't have that reach. They may be particularly strong in a particular language, particularly strong in a particular area. Even if you look at a digital platform, you know, one digital platform versus another changes dramatically depending on the nationality. Some use this, but they don't use this. Some people are still Facebook users. You know, some people skipped an entire Instagram and went straight to TikTok. So does that mean any of them are better or worse? No. But if you look at our brands, we represent entire audiences. And if you want them, we'll build a campaign for them.
Okay. Is Arabian affordable?
Yeah, look, I think we're incredibly affordable. I mean, if you look at it global pricing-wise, absolutely affordable. I mean, if you looked at it, if you were a big developer and you invested 250, 300,000 over a 6, 8, 10-week period, you'd produce great results. That might be, you know, half the profit of a 1-bedroom in that overall development from an investment point of view, and you can get reach into the millions. And we also obviously have the social. One of the things we've worked really hard with developers is about building the visual to the storytelling. And so that will include station social, where we're showing the imagery of the project or whatever else. That will include our talent doing walkthroughs of the project setup, or it might even be a completed or semi-completed project where they're doing walkthroughs. So we've got the audio storytelling and then into the visual. So yeah, I think it's super affordable. And once you're super affordable, that gives you mass reach. And if you look at it, ARN as a business does business right across our group of companies. We do business with 3,500 customers every year. That tells a story. You know, there's no media company in this country that's doing 3,500 customer interactions. That's not clients, that's literal transactions with 3,500 customers across the year. So yeah, I never use the C word, so we're not cheap, and we're certainly never want to be, but in terms of a return on investment, we're definitely affordable. Yeah, look, there's no question our commercial footprint is about, you know, I think ultimately the goal of any commercial footprint is about representing what the wider community is, and you know, this town is made or broke on real estate. So yeah, we have a very big strategy footprint. We have shows now on multiple stations where we have real estate companies on talking about the broader audience and data. We do partnerships with developers where we're doing the same thing. So yeah, we're definitely looking at ways that we can extend. As I said to you, most of our talent are hosting the launches of every project, from Chris Fade to Nyla to Mithun to Khalid to Pretty Malik are hosting that. So I think we see ourselves as part of the fabric of that process. So I think it's really important that we continue to grow that, but we continue to grow it in a sustainable way. We also, obviously an area that we haven't talked about, we also work very closely with the aggregators. So we do a huge amount of work with Babu and Property Finder, the two largest aggregators at this point in time. And we do a huge amount of work with them for the same principle. You know, they're entirely a digital business, but they use us to drive messaging, storytelling and footfall to their websites that ultimately then drives business to developers or brokers. So yeah, we have some big strategies and some things we're going to announce in the back half of this year where we'll take that to the next level.